Welcome, artists, to this lesson I call Paint Beyond the Photo, How to Unlock Hidden Colors. I often get questions about how do I go beyond the reference image and create color, energy, and vibrancy that I don't necessarily see in the reference image. Well, it's really not all that hard. My simple tips and techniques will keep you from being bound by the reference image and create dramatic results. Won't you come on into the studio and let's get started. Let's first talk about these products. I have been loving this surface, Canson Velvet. It's a fairly new product, and for this tutorial, I'm using this pad that has 3 variations of gray. I'll talk about it more in a minute. And it has fairly a limited palette with this painting. I'm using some Prismacolor new pastels, and this is my setup. I just have my surface taped to the board. And I'm also using quite a few of these Paul Rubens 96 set. They're found on Amazon. I'll have links to all products in the description of this video, but they're fairly affordable and good for beginners. Another product I'm using is some chamois cloth. I just buy a big cloth and I cut it into little squares, and I use this for blending. The reference image is from unsplash.com. I loved this photo. We've been in the middle of a shadow painting month on my Patreon page, and I loved all of the shadows being cast from the setting sun. But as much as I love this image, I want to make it my own and create some dramatic color. And that's what this lesson is about. Now, the full lesson is over on my Patreon page, where I give full commentary for this entire process. In this lesson here on Monet Cafe, I'm going to do a speed version, but I'm going to give you my tips and techniques for how I paint colors that aren't necessarily in the reference image. So I hope this will help you to learn that you don't have to be a slave to your reference photo. I think you'll really enjoy this condensed lesson, but if you would like the full lesson with all of my commentary, consider becoming a patron of mine on my Patreon page. It's only $5 a month. You can cancel at any time, and I love the fact that I get to know you. I get to see your work. It's a beautiful family. By the way, this Canson surface that I'm working on, the Canson Velvet, it's the darkest in that dark pad I showed you, but you can buy individual sheets of this as well. And mine in that large pad is approximately 12 by 16. I decided just to use the whole surface. Now, I am using Prismacolor new pastels, those long rectangular pastels I showed at the beginning. They're quite affordable. I had the 96 set. I actually purchased it years and years ago, and I still have all of the colors. They're a little harder than regular pastels, and they're great for sketching like this. So as you can see, I'm using some pretty vibrant colors here. This is what I would call pushing color. I know I have some oranges and yellows and gold colors in this image, but I use the pinks on the trees just as an initial little underpainting of sorts, because pinks are cooler than oranges, yellows, or golden colors. And so that's going to work great for the shadows in the trees. Here you can see I'm adding my darks, and this is actually a black Prismacolor new pastel. I don't often use black, but even though the surface is a dark charcoal, I still needed some value that was a little darker in value. And now I'll add some of my greens. I chose some pretty earthy greens of different values, and I would say these are close to the same value and color that's in the reference image. So this is not really stretching out away from the reference image yet, but definitely those pinks that I used are, and you're going to see me push that even further. So I'm using some of the greens to get into this large mass of trees. This stage is called blocking in. I'm working the whole, if you notice, and I'm just blocking in my colors and values in general with a very loose style. Here's where I'm adding some purple. All right, you don't see purple in that reference image, do you? Well, I don't see it, but I know that I can push the color, like I said, and push the rules of how color and light behave in a landscape, and I can bring some vibrancy and some dramatic color to this image. Now, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So let me show you on this color wheel. You can sort of cut the color wheel in half to divide it between warm and cool colors. The warm colors in this case are more on the top. And I know that in the sky, the colors in the sky, I've got these warm golds and oranges and yellows. So I'm going to take the colors that are in the sky, and I'm going to make a mark right here and show you. I'm going to work from this mark curving around to the left. And I know that I can push these colors a little beyond that warmth of just the yellows and the oranges, and I'm going to move it more into the magentas and the purples. So I'm still within the same warm colors. I'm pushing it to a little bit cooler, and I'm going to add those cool colors, the magentas and the purples, more in some of the shadowy areas. Now, this is tip number 1. So you can push color. You can find colors that are in your reference image, and you can push them a little bit beyond where they are to add some color drama to your paintings. Now, this is my explanation and my technique, how I've done it. So other artists might describe it differently, but this is why you can now see I'm using pinks. And you'll see me use purples. I put the purples in some of the shadowy areas. Now, think about the color wheel we just looked at. Remember, the pinks and the purples, or magentas and purples, were moving around the color wheel to be a little cooler. So where would you use those pinks and purples and magentas? You would use them where logically colors would be cooler in color temperature in your image. Now, cooler temperatures are going to be typically in the shadows. So that's why you see some of my colors. I put the pinks down originally on the trees, remember at the beginning? And I added some purple to them because I know they're cooler than these golden colors, and they will be more of my shadowy colors that are not necessarily what I see in the reference image, but I know that these rules work, and the purples and the pinks will bring a color harmony and excitement to the final painting. There's another tip for creating color, excitement, and going beyond the reference image that I've talked about often in my videos. I just call it punching up color. And that's kind of what it sounds like. If you have a color like, for example, in this, the orangey colors that are in the distance. By the way, that road, you're going to see me later, I decide to turn it into a waterway. So I use my artistic license for that. But with punching up color, I used my artistic license to oversaturate some of the colors in the distance with those oranges and those beautiful golden colors, because I want that to be an area of focal interest. So if you use punching up color, it's really just adding more saturation to a color. Use it sparingly. Don't have it everywhere, because if you have it everywhere, I love what artist Marla Baguetta says, if it's everywhere, it's nowhere. You want to create areas of interest and drama that lead your viewer into what you feel is the star of the show in the painting. And for me, it was that little area where now it's a river, right? Where it curves around into the distance. So first part is push color, like I showed you with the color wheel example. And part B to that is use the colors in areas that would make sense with respect to color temperature. And then the second tip is to punch up color, is to just saturate that color. It might be the same color you see in the reference image, saturate it a little bit more. And that just means more oomph, more vibrancy. They're not as neutral. And I'm going to get to the last tip soon, which is a very important one. But I think you can see that my painting is quite a bit more dramatic than the reference image. And this was something I didn't know how to do when I first started painting. I just kind of became a student of nature, and I listened to a lot of artists. By the way, I'm totally self-taught. I learned everything I know on YouTube videos and posts and forums. And I have had one pastel painting workshop, which was wonderful, by Karen Margulis. But other than that, I'm self-taught like many of you are. So I learned a lot of these things by just listening and watching and experimenting. And so I hope the way that I explain this works for you. And here's my third tip. Notice the pastel I have in my hand. I put this to real time so you could see. Can you see it has a little hint of a purple, or a little bit of a purple magenta color? And I'm glazing it over these grasses. I know that I have pushed my colors to the area of the purples in the color wheel, but if I used a purple that was as light as I did originally, it would just look wrong. Now watch how this comes to life when I apply this. This purple works for those distant trees, but notice when I add it here, do you see how that felt not right? So I covered it up with a little dark there. So my third tip is you can use colors that you don't necessarily see in your reference image, but if you don't get the value right, the lightness or the darkness, it is just not going to work. So every time I use some of these purples or these pinks in this image, I'm trying to find a pastel selection that is the correct lightness or darkness for the scene. And if you're curious about how that rule works, I have a digital file, a document in my Patreon shop. On my Patreon page, I have a shop where I have certain helpful tools for sale and videos, but this one is called Values in a Landscape, and it's a graphic that I created that I believe really helps you to see how value works in a landscape. It's only $4, and I'll have a link to this in the description of this video and as a little clickable link in the top corner here. And you might want to browse around my Patreon shop. I have lots of my full lessons for sale. If you're just one of those people that you don't like to subscribe to things, I mean, the $5 a month is the best value for sure, but you can also find other lessons there. So I think you should be able to see by now that my painting is more dramatic in color than the reference image, but it's using some of the same colors that are already there and just pushing them a bit. That's where I'm using my chamois cloth. I did a little blending on the sky. I sometimes really love a textural sky, but I felt like it was competing with the rest of the landscape. So a chamois cloth for blending works great on this Canson Velvet. And let me take a moment to brag on this paper. I absolutely love it. My video before this one was the first time I did a series painting on it. It is water friendly, even though I didn't use any water-based mediums on this. I do in the lesson before this one. I'll link that lesson to the end of this video so you can just click on it. Now, I decided to lighten this image up a bit. It's very dark in the reference image, so I'm just kind of punching up light values now and just making a little bit of drama and a little bit of focal interest. I really hope these tips that I've given you will help you to implement these strategies for going beyond the reference image in your own paintings. I would love to hear if these tips were like an aha moment for you. And also, of course, I'd love to have you in my Patreon family, but this Monet Cafe channel, I have just loved getting to know some of you over the years. And if you're new to this channel, I hope you'll subscribe. And here's the final. I think you can see the dramatic color. I hope these tips helped you. Would you please let me know in the comments? I'd love to hear about that. All right, everyone. God bless and happy painting.